everybody, we're at the Imp and the Ogre. My name is Paul.
This is Ryan.
And today we're talking about the Sinister Secrets of Saltmarsh.
Dun, dun, dun. So, Sinister Secrets of Saltmarsh. It's details for you. It was originally published in 1981. It's written by David J. Brown and Don Turnbull. It was an interesting adventure in that it was the first adventure that was published out of the TSR UK offices. Ooh. So it was a big deal at the time. It's also known as U1, and it is the first in a series of 3 adventures. It's followed by U2 and U3, but we're just going to be talking about the first one, U1, today. It was designed to be effectively for low-level adventurers, so it can run it as a first-level party. I believe it was first through third. Mm-hmm. This is older edition, right? It's first edition D&D, so it could basically be a party of 5 to 10, I think the adventure recommends. And just where you would get it these days is on the DM's Guild, which is pretty fantastic. Last time I checked there, it was like $2.
Super cheap.
Super cheap. So a lot of these older adventures are fantastic, and for bang for your buck, you really can't go wrong at $2.
No, you can't.
So do you want to run through the basics of the story? What's it about?
Sure. Effectively, this adventure is that you head into town and run into rumors of a haunted house. Haunted house is not actually haunted, but being run as a smuggler's den for smugglers. And the whole point of the adventure is to rout out the smuggler's den and find the little surprise of what they're smuggling and why they're smuggling at the end, and get on a pirate ship or become pirates if you want at some point.
yeah. I mean, basically, it's broken into 2 parts. We have the haunted house, quote unquote, section of it, and then there's a ship combat section, which is actually pretty interesting and could go horribly wrong. So, what did you think of it? Did you like it? You know, what's your impressions of it? I imagine it's the first time you've read it.
It was the first time I read it. I did like it. I think it would be a lot better for detail-oriented players. There's not a lot of run and gun in the first half to 3/4 of this adventure. Some neat encounters in the house, but if your players aren't used to searching for things or looking for things, and depending on how lenient you want to be with them finding things easily, it could be super boring investigating the house, or it could be interesting for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can go into the details in a bit here, but there's a lot of breadcrumbs out there, and there's enough, I think, especially in the house. I think there's enough random-ish encounters, right? Like there are random encounters, like any good old school adventure has, but there's also like a lot of fixed ones, right? There's a lot of environmental animals, if you will, right? There's snakes and spiders and all kinds of fun things like that. So there's enough combat, I think, in there, and what I like in general about using older adventures, right? And I understand lots of people are kind of hesitant, especially like we're primarily talking about 5th edition, trying to say with the current edition of D&D here. And I think a lot of people are hesitant to go back and look at the adventures from older editions, right? I mean, this is obviously what Wizards of the Coast feels, as most of their big published adventures are just reskinning older adventures for 5th edition, which, I can take it or leave that personally. But what I always like about going back to an older adventure and adapting it to use for a newer edition is I feel, at least this is me personally, when I'm using a published adventure for the edition I'm using, I tend to be a little bit more hesitant about adapting it and modifying it. Right? The rules are there, everything's there, so you got to just go with the flow. But when I use an older adventure, I'm kind of forced to change things.
Yep.
So I've definitely found that in, adapting and using older adventures and stealing plot hooks and whatnot, it's definitely been what's fueled my sort of adventure usage technique. Like I'm definitely more likely to modify stuff and steal bits and change bits. And I think you've never really been comfortable doing that, or not normally part of your usual, preparation, that going to an older adventure forces you to do that. And you get a little bit more into the habit of playing around with how an adventure is set up.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And I guess some other things that I generally did like about the adventure is I like its modularity. So we were talking a bit about this off podcast here before we got started. But what's really nice about this adventure is it's in 2 parts. And by design, you can use either part, right?
Yep.
Like you can run them consecutively, but you can drop either of these parts into any ongoing campaign really, really easily. Like there's really no reason that they have to be run consecutively. There's no reason why you have to continue on and run U2 and U3, right?
Nope.
You like the ship combat part, steal that.
Yep.
Right? You like the haunted quote unquote house part, use that, right?
Yep.
So that's really nice about it. Also, I did enjoy the fact that in the adventure, as you read through it, there's lots of like reminders and advice regarding things like how to keep the plot in order. Reminders about what the players should know at this point or shouldn't know at this point.
Yeah.
And I think the writers did a pretty good job at giving advice to the would-be DMs on how to keep things in order.
Yeah, and pitfalls to watch out for. There's lots of little advice on how to avoid pitfalls without giving away too much information, or that you could ruin the section of the house if they find out too early that it is a smuggler's den, which, if that happens, I mean, well, whatever, it happens, but I think the idea is that the writers of this wanted the adventurers to think that it was a haunted house for a while before figuring it out that it was a smuggler's den, which I liked. I like that too. So it gives a lot of autonomy to the runner of this game to create a lot of unique things for their style of DMing in this adventure, which I guess can lead us to the hook of the adventure. I thought it was pretty straightforward, and new players would probably get a little bit lost, and you'd have to drop them a little more not so subtle hints as to how to get the hook of this. But it's effectively just hang out in town. You described it as a checklist that you have to do before doing it, but I read it as a just hang out in town and talk to people until you find out that the rumors of a haunted house are around.
Yeah, and I fully admit that this is definitely an older school adventure design decision, right? Like they've you read a lot of these older adventures. The assumption with players is you're just out there looking for trouble.
Yep.
Right? It's not, or at least it wasn't nearly as narrative driven, I would say, as it is, especially in 5th edition. Like, there's definitely been that push towards it. So I kind of agree with you that, like, while the hook is fine, you're in town and, you hear rumors about this haunted mansion, so let's go see if there's loot in it, right? I think it would work a lot better if the players had a legitimate hook before they showed up. Okay. And like my thoughts, right, this is just my spitballing here, is that, as we'll talk about, I'm sure, that we learn eventually that the house was the home of an alchemist.
Yep.
Right. And that's information the players can find out in town. And then obviously the idea is that his ghost or his, is haunting it, or his, crimes against humanity has tainted it with evil or what have you.
Yep.
But my idea would basically be that the players know
There's something going on.
that this is where an alchemist was. So like I would probably give them a patron that's sending them on a mission.
Yep.
Right? Maybe there was rumors of this alchemist had succeeded in discovering how to make a philosopher's stone.
Yep.
Which is actually kind of hilarious for reasons that we'll get to, because if your players are going in there looking for a philosopher's stone, hilarity is more likely to ensue. I don't want to get ahead of us there. But I like the idea mostly of giving, especially inexperienced players, a specific goal.
Yeah.
Right? So they still, can go to the town with a purpose, right? They know that there was this.
It also help having a reason to be in town and to ask questions will help players prompt what they're supposed to do. I found it very difficult when you have, or it can be frustrating as a DM when you have an idea of what you want to run, but your players don't know how to find that first thread to get there. Asking for rumors, or if players go into town knowing that where there's an idea of what they should be talking to NPCs about, it makes those interactions a hell of a lot easier instead of just being randomly dropping like, so did you hear about the haunted house?
Well, that's a really good point you bring up there. And this is sort of your reactive versus proactive play, right? The adventure is designed basically with the idea that the DM is going to be throwing out all of the random people at the bar talking to you. Whereas, like you're saying, if they have something they're looking for, it's sort of the onus is on the players to be asking around. So they have something to ask around about, and then it seems like they're more in charge.
It also
of
gives
the
them
situation.
the opportunity to find the information instead of the DM giving it to them, which is what ends up happening if there's no idea of what they're supposed to be asking about. Like, unless they're just got a list of things that they ask. So, any monsters in town? Okay. Any hauntings lately? No. Okay. Yeah,
So
like
what's
just
there-
going through the adventurer's checklist. Yeah. Goblins?
So
No.
which NPC has the question mark over? I mean,
Yeah.
it's exclamation point over its head, right? Like, it's a good point, and I think that's a better way to do it. So I'd probably highly recommend some sort of hook. Like, it doesn't have to be they already know what's in there, but if they have a reason for being in the town before they get there, like you said, they'll actually be invested in asking around, trying to find the next clue to
Yep.
get to where they're going.
That's right. Going from there, the town.
Yeah.
We wanted to talk about the town a little bit. I did like that the writers gave it a lot of discretion to the DM to create the NPCs. They mentioned notable NPCs that you should have in town, council members and innkeepers. But other than that, there wasn't a whole lot of information that they gave you as to how to run these characters or what the town should look like. That being said, that's a lot of work for a DM to put in and to create that color for their players. So depending on how much effort you want to put into this, it could be a very rich town, or it could be sort of skin and bones until it gets fleshed out by players a little bit. And your ability to think on the fly, depending on how much you've prepared, will lend itself to what your town is like in the end.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think the assumption in the adventure is that the players shouldn't be spending that much time in it, right? So it's very bare bones. And yeah, you can make it all yourself, but I would probably just steal a town from some other adventure, right? Like, once again, that's what the DM's Guild is there for. Just go grab the Village of Hamlet or something like that. Once again, it's probably only like $2 and has a really well detailed town. And we might talk about that adventure in a later episode. Or what are other good ones I can think of off the top of my head? Even Fandelver, if you happen to have the beginners box set.
Yeah.
It's got a well-detailed town in there. Like, I would just steal a town from somewhere else. Or, do you really need Saltmarsh? Right? You don't. You just have to have a town that's reasonably near the sea.
Yep.
And you can drop this into
Anywhere.
any town. You're running this in the Forgotten Realms. This can be in Baldur's Gate. This can be in Waterdeep. Like, it doesn't have to be in Saltmarsh. I mean, granted, then you don't get the lovely alliteration of the Sinister Secret of Saltmarsh, but
Only you know what it's called, though. Your players don't.
most likely, right? So I think it definitely needs some love to make it feel at least real, and it doesn't, sort of. Like, it's definitely just sort of a quest hub more than anything else, a place where the players can retreat to rest up and buy equipment more than anything else. So I'd say that's definitely a weakness of the adventure as written. Though, yes, the authors, I think, did this intentionally.
Yeah.
Right? Like, they definitely sort of make it clear that this isn't an omission on their part. This is a challenge, here, you can do it yourself. It's a writing exercise for the DM more than anything else.
Absolutely, and you could use it as that as well. But this is also first edition AD&D, and there's been 3 other editions, second, third, fourth, and fifth now. So there's a lot less adventures have been written along the years, or more adventures have been written along the years. It's changed a little bit the way that they've written adventures.
Oh yeah, I think this was just a particular design decision by these folks. Right, lots of the old editions, it was mostly just an amazing town with interesting things around it. So take it or leave it. I'm not going to complain too much about it because I do enjoy the rest of it. So for however the players learn about the house, right, be it from just hanging out in the bar being like, so is there any adventuring work to be had in these parts, or are there because you've specifically sent them there, their next checklist, I guess, is to actually go to the town, which is outside of town.
Go to the house.
Go to the house. Sorry,
House
go to the
outside of
house, which is outside of town. So they need to travel to this old, dilapidated house, which is, I can't remember how far out of town. 20.
I don't know. I don't remember. It wasn't far.
It's not, you can't see it from the outside though, right? Like it's a destination along that old lonely road that's overgrown because nobody's been there in 20 odd years, right? So I'd probably play that up, and then you get to the house. So what do you think of the house? Let's walk through it, if you will.
I think you thought the house was a lot more exciting than I thought the house was. They do a good job, I guess, describing what each room is like for the players. I found that I thought, unless you had detailed-oriented players, a lot of the loot and that kind of stuff that's around the house, they probably wouldn't find. Like a loose brick inside of the chimney, a loose whatever inside of the whatever. It's lots of little minute little treasures hid around the house that the owners of the house probably hid somewhere. So then depending on how lenient you want to be with, I searched the room, they would probably find nothing if you went that way.
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I also think that that's probably not too much of a problem because 5th edition, you shouldn't be getting as many magical items as you do in earlier editions. Right? Like, I'm reasonably sure, and I don't have a whole list in front of me, but like in the house itself, there's magic armor, there's 2 rings of protection. I can't remember what else there is, but there's way too much magic items for a group of first level adventurers, right? Once again, like if you're running through this with 10 players,
it'd be fine.
You know, it would be fine, but I'd probably just cut some of that stuff out, right? Yeah. Now, that being said, there's some stuff like about the house that I really enjoyed. And we'll just talk about sort of floor by floor. So, but in general, I liked what the authors did with their wandering monster table. Right? It's not very extensive. There's only a couple things on there, but they gave a reason why each of those encounters would occur.
Right.
Right. So there's one of them, I think, was a little group of goblins. Yep. Right. Like, why is there goblins here? They tell you why there's goblins there. And I thought that was fantastic. Mm-hmm. You got a random rolls for wandering monsters, which, you know, isn't really something that all DMs use. So use it, don't use it, what you want. But for me, reading them is like, oh, that's nice. I kind of wish, well, especially for a closed system like a dungeon.
Yeah.
You know, like if it's a wandering monster table for the wilderness, it doesn't really matter, mm-hmm. right? Like, why is there a wyvern there? Because there's a wyvern there, right? Yep. And sometimes I would definitely say that it's fun as a DM that when you get something random on a wandering monsters table, then you have to come up, why is there a frost giant hanging around here? Well, then it's sort of a plot hook that you get to build on the fly there, which is kind of fun. But I enjoyed that. Like, and something I just want to mention in general about this particular adventure, because I don't really see it so much anymore in more recent adventures, is some of the descriptions they use is fantastic. Mm-hmm. Like, there's lots of potions that you find in it, mm-hmm. and they describe the color, the aroma,
that's true,
of these potions, now, which is completely ridiculous, but I'm a sucker for that type of stuff.
Yeah.
And this sort of ties into that idea too, is that this adventure has lots of readable text.
It does, yeah. One of the things that I did like about the house in general and the monsters that are inside the house is there's lots of like disease and poison based afflictions that they can get. So yeah, the encounters aren't anything special. They run into like bugs under the sink kind of idea.
Spiders.
Right, but they can be poisoned or afflicted with ailments along the way. So run those properly if you're doing this, and it'll hinder your players quite a bit through the rest of this part of the house. I like that a lot about the dungeon, which I find like ailments aren't used too often, or as often as they should be.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's definitely a weakness, at least up to this point in 5th edition. They didn't really build a lot of that into it. Like, the DMG has like 3 diseases and maybe a few more poisons. Like, there's a lot of leeway in that, and that's one of the things I probably just use as is. Like, I wouldn't even try to come up with an equivalent to the particular spider poison. No, just use the spider poison. as is. It's not overly complicated. Make up a DC for it, depending on how mean of a DM you are. Sets your scale there, but nothing in there is going to kill them.
No, but there's some fun ones like the falling asleep for 1d whatever amount of hours, right? Like harmless, but could be a problem for your players, or they're trying to figure something else out.
Or temporary strength damage. I like it in the sense that it's kind of like they're there to use up resources.
Yeah.
And they're there to wear down your adventurers, right? Which is something that doesn't always get used so much, especially when you fall into like the 15-minute adventuring day. It's just like, it's monsters. Let's just use all of our abilities and then we'll come back tomorrow and do the next room, right? So there's lots of minor encounters, none of which should terrify your players. Or just be like, that wasn't too big of a deal. Let's do more. But the idea is to slowly wear them down. So when they find the exciting stuff, then they've already expended some resources. They might be down a few hit points or some built-in penalties. Maybe they got some exhaustion built in, which is, I'd use that.
There are also things, if ignored, are a problem, right? Like one of your players falling asleep for 4 hours could be the entire first part of this adventure.
Yep.
So if they forget about it and don't do it properly, they're down a player the entire time.
Yep. But I wrote this down, so I'm going to say it. But I mean, like, getting back to the descriptions, like, literally, you find a potion, and it's described as being a watery, rose-colored liquid with a spicy aroma. Like, that's definitely something that I don't think we do as much anymore in the more recent editions, is, being able to identify a potion by, like, its color and aroma and maybe its taste. So it was just it's fun, and I don't think that we do that nearly as much. I think there's definitely been a push more away from like the default text descriptions in more recent editions.
That's an interesting point, that like the aroma and smell, because you could train your players to trick them at a later time.
Yeah.
If they always think that a healing potion smells like cinnamon and looks like a light red color, and then they find a poisonous vial that smells like cinnamon, looks like a red color, they might just use it thinking it's a health potion.
Well, and I think that's a great thing to build in if you want to do that. And this is something like that got used, and I'm not super familiar with how cursed items continue to work in 5th edition, but there's definitely in older editions that cursed items always looked like the actual item.
Yep.
Right? So the whole point was to like trick the player into wanting to use it, being like, sweet, it's a Vorpal blade, except it beheads yourself. Like that type of stuff as the sort of the bait and switch I always kind of enjoyed. So this gives you that kind of opportunity if you want to. But it's just sort of fun flavor text. And I always like the readable stuff. I get that some DMs like, oh no, I want to do it all myself. But if you're under a time pressure, or you're just, don't have tons of... you don't want to write all your own stuff, or you don't want to memorize the adventure. Like if I'm running my own stuff, I'm making up room descriptions on the fly, and I don't have to remember to keep them consistent. But if I'm running a published adventure, like it's nice to have that there. And if we're at a table, I can just read out the description. If a player goes back into the room, they're like, what was in that room? I can go back to the description without having to mess around with it. So it's just a preparation thing. I know some DMs just never really enjoyed that, and sometimes I find it to be a bit tedious myself, but I do like it when it's done well, and I think it's pretty well done in this adventure. Also, how can you not enjoy the house when there's spooky warnings and screams that come from particular parts? There's magic mouth spells that get used.
Yeah.
Come on, that's fun. It's
creative.
That's capital F fun.
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess I'll explain. So what's going on here? There's a couple places in the house that magic mouth spells trigger. Magic mouth spells are basically spells that allow inanimate objects to speak, more or less, right? And I'm not going to remember the specific details of the spell, but that's basically it. So there's a couple of places where this happens to dissuade your players from going into the basement, I believe. I think in both cases they're on the stairs down. I'm not. I don't think it's inhibiting you from going upstairs.
No.
And it's great stuff. It's like, you are doomed if you go down here, or, screams of torture or cackling laughter. And I mean, come on, that's kind of fantastic, right? Once the players get into the house, like if nothing else, that type of stuff should tip them off that there's more going on here than just, spiders under the countertops.
Yep.
Right? So the first level is nothing too exceptional, but I think there's enough stuff there that should keep a player interested. Okay, if you're detailed oriented, there's lots of stuff that you can investigate. If you're, you just want to smash things, there's definitely
Some
enough.
smashies.
There's enough combat that you won't get bored, right? There's not one every single room, but there's enough, and they're usually triggered encounters too.
Yeah.
Right. Like I always kind of enjoy that it's not just, oh, you walk into this room and there's 3 goblins waiting for you to attack, and then you go to the next room and there's a bugbear who's been hanging around waiting for you to attack. Like it's usually you investigate something,
Open the cupboard or whatever.
and as
it
a
is.
consequence of that, it triggers, like they're triggered encounters.
Yep.
Which is useful.
Yep.
So in the house, you can go upstairs, you can go downstairs. Upstairs is kind of a dead end, but let's talk about that because there's some cool stuff that are up there.
Yeah, this was the first part of the adventure that I found something that could be very fun to play, which is the planted prisoner. Ned. Who, in the adventure, they actually say he'll describe himself as a 2nd level thief, when in fact he is a 3rd level assassin.
Yeah.
But I liked the reason why he was there, and I like that there's holes in their plan with him being there. That the councilman who's sort of
Or the merchant.
whatever, yeah,
There's the idea is there's a guy in town
that knows that you're going there.
that's in on the smuggling ring.
Yeah.
He knows that you're going there because he's heard about it because the players have been asking around. So he's planted Ned to try to stop you.
He has, but they also haven't prepared well enough at all. So it's kind of like this shoddy little plan where he's there to sort of try and foil you from figuring out what's going on. But
It's terrible.
But I like the inconsistencies that he'll lie and say he's a thief, but the writers make sure that if you had a thief in your party that you tried to speak thieves' cant to him, he doesn't know how to speak thieves' cant. And the reason for this is that the blow on the back of his head has given him a temporary amnesia. I thought those were fun little...
I think it's fantastic that it's such a poorly designed
plan,
but by the author's intention.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's not bad because they did a bad job of it. It's bad because they're like, this guy had no time to try to stop you and thought this was a good idea, and it's not. Right? Like, if the players are reasonably thinking about this, they should figure out that there's something not super... on the up and up with Ned. And I love it because the authors write this too. They flat out say, like, the authors remind the DMs that, that if Ned hadn't been here at all, the players would probably be less likely to investigate. But the whole thing with Ned is that he came here to investigate and he got clubbed up the side of the head.
Yeah.
So it tells your players that there's somebody in here that clubs people upside the head, right? Like,
and Ned's on sort of a timer that he's at some point going to try to assassinate a party member, which is great too. And the writers say that he's supposed to try and foil their attempts of finding the basement along the way.
No.
I don't think it ever really describes how he's supposed to do that. They just say try and be subtle about it. So I don't know if you try and role play him as being like, we should get out of here, or we shouldn't go down there, without it being overtly like obvious. But it's kind of comical in the sense that it could be pretty obvious.
well, yeah, and this is actually something worth talking about because, like, what do you think happens if the players are just like, oh, okay, yeah, we'll take you back to town. And they take them back to town, and then they come right back, right? Like, what do you do then? Like, like, it's not even what you would do yet. Then, what would Ned and his employer, do then, right?
You'd assume they'd have to try and do something to stop you from going down. So
he just they get back there, and he's in another room tied up. They got me again, right? Like,
no.
No, I'm not Ned. I'm his twin brother, Ted. You seen Ned? Where did he go? Right? Like, it would be kind of interesting if you end up with that type of player that's like, oh yeah, sure, we can take you back to town. Like you'd have to set up something else after that point to account for some sort of maybe an ambush or whatnot. Like, they don't really get into what the resources this particular individual has at their fingertips. So one would assume that this is the best case scenario.
Yeah.
Right? Like them going back to town and being delayed seems like probably the most likely outcome that even this poorly designed plan could have. Right?
Yeah.
Because realistically, do you think that, they would know the party composition, so they should know that one guy should not be able to stop them. Mm-hmm. So fighting them isn't really the idea. So I haven't thought of anything particular here, but it probably, if that is the outcome, then you need to have some sort of plan.
It would make for the rest of the exploration of the house just a seek and find, though, really, because if they had time to be warned that they were coming, and that's part of the next section, that if they're warned, they evacuate and take their stuff, right?
Yeah.
And then it's just a seek and find about finding the right clues and making sure that you can get to the boat in time and
do all that and that could be the best case scenario, is like that gives them enough time to get the smugglers out of there, which actually doesn't ruin it, because there's still all the alchemist stuff, there's still the undead, as we'll get to, in there as well. It just sort of changes the outcome of it. But I think this would be, you could have fun with this, right? Like maybe while they've been away, he's set up a false rumor about one of the players. He can claim that one of them robbed him or stole something from his business, and then you can get into that type of stuff if you really wanted to. But I guess from a best case scenario, or the easiest way to run this out, is if they take Ned back to town, and that might delay them a day, that's enough time for the contact in town to make contact with the smugglers, and they decamp, right? Yep. They just pack up and head out, which is fine. I think that's totally reasonable. The other thing I want to talk about the upper level stuff is there's tons of really fun environmental things in here, right? There's a cloak that is just a cloak, boring plain out cloak, but if you disturb it, it poisons you with yellow mold, right? Like if you leave it alone, you're fine. And I don't know what you thought about it, but there's the spider trap, whereas there's something's glittering in the fireplace, and if you go to investigate, spiders attack you. Yeah. And then all it turns out to be is like a shiny piece of broken glass.
Yeah, it's great.
It's perfect. Like that type of stuff is just super fun. There's you can fall through the floor in one of the rooms if they're not careful. Like
an animated broom in one of the rooms or something. Or
no, that's a different adventure.
That's the next one.
That's the next one we're going to talk about. But what else? Oh, and then I wanted to mention that you can get into the attic. There's no reason to go into the attic, but if you do, there's sturges. And I don't know how sturges became such an iconic sort of D&D monster, but they tend to show up all the time in low-level adventures, mostly because they got the blood drain. I don't think they're as scary in 5th edition as they were in some of the older editions. Right? I can't remember if it was 3rd edition where they caused constitution damage. Which is terrifying because your constitution reaches 0, you die. I believe in 5th edition they just drain your blood, like they attach, and then you lose so many hit points a round. But they're fun. They're flying bugs that suck your blood, so it's classic. It's kind of fun, but it's also completely random. Right,
yeah.
Like it
could happen or not happen.
It could happen or could not happen. That goes for a lot of these adventures. Yeah. Like, depending on how thorough your players are, so how sort of mercenary they are and how loot driven they are. If they're digging through everything, they kind of get punished. I guess that's kind of a fun way to think about this. Is the first part of this adventure really kind of does quote unquote punish the type of players that are all about scrounging for every last little bit of loot.
There is lots of rewards though if they do scrounge.
Oh, there's all kinds of fun treasure and there's money and potions.
Yep.
And that type of stuff. But there's definitely that risk reward, because if they're scrounging for all of this fun loot that they get, there's all these encounters.
The hand's going to get bitten a little bit.
Oh, yes. It's going to get bitten often. So
a lot of it.
How the first,
I like that, though. Yeah. That's good. I mean, it's equal risk reward. So, and that's the good balance to have. You shouldn't give things to your players without them having to have suffered a bit.
No, I completely agree. So the house I think is fine. So anyway, so you search the house, you find all this kind of stuff, and things get really more interesting once you move into the basement. And there's 2 ways into the basement, right? One is to I don't have the map in front of me, so this is a bit harder to remember. But I think one of them takes you to the root cellar, and there's the dead adventurer in there.
Yes.
And there's a secret chamber, secret door that leads into the second section.
Yeah.
But there's also there's another way into because there's the cellar part too, the wine cellar, which is where the main as we'll see the main rest area is for the it's the smugglers. And then there's another way up too, because there's a trap door, right? There's 3 possible ways of getting into this area in the basement, and it's all sort of connected by secret doors. Like, this adventure has lots of secret doors, all things considered.
I'm trying to visualize the map in my head right now. One of the things about whether or not, whichever route you decide to take into the basement, whether or not you're quiet enough to get down there changes what's going to happen in the basement. Yep. So it could end up being like an all-out brawl-ish in the basement with the smugglers that are there, or if you're loud and they know that you're coming, they leave and there's nothing down there except for the undead and whatever else is down there.
I think that's basically it. Yeah, there's one smuggler sort of on very loose watch.
Yeah,
and if he hears you, he falls back, warns everybody,
and they all leave.
So if you're super loud upstairs, whether they leave right away, I don't know that they would necessarily. Like, that's kind of I'd put that fully in a DM's call. Yeah. Right? Like, you could definitely catch them preparing to leave. Yeah. You know what I mean? And still have the encounters without trying to put too much of a pressure on the players.
In mind, I would have left a smuggler or two anyway, whether they were alerted or not down there, I think. Or at least give the hint that they see something leaving. Because, I don't know, I don't think it's safe to assume that there's going to be people down there. I mean, they could deduce eventually that maybe, like, okay, there's an open cave mouth to this. But in the notes, it says that if they have time to prepare, they take them and all of the contraband with them. Yeah. So it would just be like a basement cellar with access to the water. Which, I mean, you could say that, maybe it's just a cautious alchemist that wants a way out if he can. I mean, there would be enough hints along the way to say that maybe something else is going on. Yeah. But, if you leave that last smuggler that drops something into the water and you see him get away, it just goes back to how we were talking about the hooks in the beginning. It's going to let your players know that there's something more beyond this that they can do.
Yeah, and I think for me running this, I would have the smugglers be kind of hesitant to just abandon everything. Yeah. This is a really good hideout. Yeah. And there's a bunch of them, right? Like, it's not an encounter that it's not designed to overwhelm your party, right? Like, it's totally level appropriate. But from their standpoint, are they just going to run away? So unless there's evidence or information to suggest that your players are super dangerous, I could see them being more inclined to fight than to flee.
Am I remembering this wrong? But isn't like their boss like a level 3 or 4 like
magic user? Yeah.
I mean, if you got like 4 level 1 players going in, that's got to be difficult for them.
Yeah. So I mean, I'd probably be more inclined in the adventure, instead of having them run away, have them like prepare an ambush. Yeah. Like set some traps. Or something like that, especially in a situation where you have players that are, being the 15-minute adventurer, that are leaving, coming back, leaving and coming back. I think in that type of situation, that gives the smugglers lots of time to get information about the players, and set up countermeasures. Like, and even just simple things like baiting them into going into the attic to fight the Sturges. Taking advantage of some of the environmental stuff.
That's where you could use Ned to plant information, right?
That's a great point. Yeah, that's awesome.
I heard them in the attic.
Yes.
Right? You could get him to drop hints like that where you're not overtly trying to foil them searching the house, but maybe he knows that it's infested. Yeah. Right? That they know that it's infested. Like, he's got little bits of information that could lead the players to be whittled down a little bit before they get to the basement.
To direct them into danger. Yeah. Without it being super obvious. Like, no, that's a fantastic idea. I hadn't thought of that. No, that's a really good point.
One of the things that, now that I'm thinking about the basement and the smugglers leaving, is that at one point they can find a note, which is the signaling map that the smugglers on shore use to signal the boat that comes and picks up the stuff. But you'd have to think that, because it says that these smugglers are smart and will defend, right? Yeah. That if they knew people were in the house, that all of a sudden, if the boat was being sick, like, I figured that these smugglers would have had a way to contact the boat at some point to let them know that they're not at the house anymore. So whoever is signaling them in the next part of the adventure is not the people that are part of the operation.
Oh, I think if you end up with a situation where the smugglers have left, Yeah, the second part of the adventure doesn't happen. To be honest, like I fully expect that if the ground crew, the house crew takes off, they got a little boat. They probably have some other place where they would a secondary rendezvous point. They'd let the main body of the smuggling operation know about it. It just ends.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I think that would be, there is no ship part of it, which is totally fine. Like, I don't actually think that's necessarily problematic, but I think that if you have your heart set on going through all of this adventure, you kind of can't let them get away unless the players really mess up.
Yeah.
Right. If they make a complete dog's breakfast of it, then like, yeah, you know what? You don't get to have a pirate ship. Right. Like that, we're doing something else now, right?
Eventually.
Like,
I guess before we jump to the boat, there's
there's still stuff I want to talk about. Yeah.
The Alchemists Room.
Oh, before we get there, I did have a couple points that I wanted to talk about, just because that's sort of the final point
of the basement.
The basement, and it's kind of, they won't miss that. If the players get in there, it's not a hidden situation or anything like that. But there's a couple of things in the bottom part of the house that I kind of had problems with. Like, one of the basement rooms has, I think it's described as like an adventurer that's like a rotting corpse of an adventurer in magic armor. Once again, like, I don't know, I'd give first level
His
players
+1 plate mail or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
He was wearing.
Like, plate mail in and of itself is a huge
That's one thing I
reward.
noticed, that like, yeah, there's magic items that they get, but by the end of this adventure, your players are rich.
Oh, super.
They would retire.
They could.
They would retire.
Oh, you get so much money in this first one, which is kind of makes sense if you take into context of the older editions, because you used to get experience points for money. So if you had a party of like 10 players, getting all of this money and divvying it up 10 ways, that's actually not that much money, and it might just be enough to bring the entire group of 10 up to level 2. So I'd probably adjust some of that stuff, or just go crazy. Let them be rich. Let them be rich. Let them be robber barons. You know, like, that could be a fun adventure. But part of that though is like, there's an adventurer, a dead one, through mysterious means. Like, the
adventurer with +1 plate mail was killed by 3 bolts, I think.
Yeah.
They say he's got arrows sticking out of him,
but never was looted for his super magical armor. Right, even though I think his money purse is stolen. So I don't really like the idea that there's the armor on it. What I did like about it, he's infested with rot grubs. So if you players get too close to it, the rot grubs can burrow into them and then kill them like outright. Like, I can't remember what it is specifically, but you need to do like fire damage to the grub that's burrowing into you within the first X number of rounds, and if you don't, it gets inside of you and you start like losing constitution or something like that until you die,
which is amazing,
which is fantastic.
Stuff like that I don't think exists really in 5e unless you pulled it from
an older edition.
Yeah.
No, there's a lot of fun stuff like that, and even 3rd edition had a lot more saver dies, if you will, and 5th edition's kind of drawn that back because it's got more of a narrative focus, and that's fine. Like, I'm not saying one way is better than the other way, but sometimes you miss it because maybe 2 of your players died, but now you got +1 plate mail, right? Like, it seems like a fair trade-off, yes. So you just send like the halfling rogue in there and he dies, but the warrior got the +1 plate mail. Seems like a pretty reasonable
trade. Good risk reward.
Exactly, right? And you just go to the tavern, you get yourself another, first level.
You can play
Ned, exactly. Ned gets recruited into the team, right?
Yeah.
So that I saw as either potentially really fun or problematic. So that's a decision you got to make on your own, whether or not you want that. Also, I kind of just had to point this out. Once again, this is getting into like the details that you have in this adventure, which I personally love. When the players search the room that turns out to be the room of the boss, the wizard guy, right? They can find a spell book and they find a bunch of other stuff in there too. Yeah. But they do also find an illustrated book of erotic poetry.
Which is, illustrated in detail. That was funny.
I was reading that, I was like, that is just... those type of little details sometimes just make me smile, and I think they even say like it has some value, right?
Easily sold for 10 gold in town.
There's a lot of other random books that you find in here which are all really nicely described,
it's true.
But the authors take the time to say like you can sell it for this much, but not in Saltmarsh. Like you got to find a collector and what have you, and I like those types of little details to give non-monetary rewards, right? Like, I guess in the old days we would call these like art objects, erotic poetry is an art object. But I always find it kind of fun when you get things that are worth money in an abstract sense. It's not coin, it's not jewelry, it's not easily portable. It's like you have a giant painting of a horse that if you can get to the appropriate place, it's worth X number of dollars.
True.
But now you need to haul around a framed painting for forever. And I do get kind of a kick out of that. So one last thing I wanted to mention about the fight in there before we talk about the Alchemist Lab, and I will mention the stuff they find in there as well.
Sure.
But in the last fight, there's gnolls, and they foreshadow gnolls, right? I think there's one of the books that you find includes like command words for gnolls, and the idea is that the big bad boss guy in this part has hypnotized gnolls to do his bidding, which is awesome. I like the theory behind it, but it's one of those situations where it might not translate properly to 5th edition because the way gnolls have changed in 5th edition, and I don't really want to get into it too much, and I think that Volo's Guide to Monsters does a fantastic job of getting into it, but like gnolls are insane cannibalistic murder machines, and in this context, like they used to be a little bit different, but in the new context, you might want to reflavor these as some other monstrous humanoid, even just like an orc, right? Like it mechanically that doesn't really change anything, but I think it fits better thematically. In general, that's something to be aware of. We can talk about the treasure at the end in a second here, but you've been waiting to talk about the Alchemists Room, so fire.
Not really. I just think it's like a great room.
Well, there's the skeletons first.
Yeah, there's the skeletons first that are, I can't even remember. They're just there. They activate when you go into the room.
What I like first is there's the door that's barred from the outside
that the smugglers won't go.
Danger on it. Danger, do not open. When I read that, it reminded me of The Walking Dead. Dead inside. There's a door that's barred that has undead on the other side, and I liked that.
The very simple, like, guys, don't go in here.
Exactly. Just bad. Don't go.
Yeah, but you go in and there's this 4 skeletons or something that animate once you've been in the room for a while, and you get rid of them and end up in the Alchemist Room, which has more flavorful texts in it. I can't remember what they were, but I thought it was a great little room that you actually find the book that says like how to make a philosopher's stone,
and then you find random things that made out of gold.
Yeah, so it goes. You can tell that the way that they did is it started with something small. I can't remember what the smallest item was, but then it goes to like an apple, and then something bigger, and then like a human skull, all full. Like one thing that I thought would be funny, that if your players did try to lug this all out, like the weight of gold. Like to carry around a solid human skull worth of gold would be super heavy.
Oh, it'd be super heavy.
But I thought it was a fun room, and then you can find, I think, what you enjoyed about the stone.
There's the cursed luck stone. It's awesome because it builds this all up, and especially if you've like used it as a hook to get the foreshadowing in there, right? It builds it up that he has created a philosopher's stone. You find him holding this stone. It basically all but says this is a philosopher's stone, and it's a cursed item.
Yep.
And it's beautiful. Like, it's not even super punitive. It's like -1 to attacks and damage and skills.
-1 to attack to hit, I think.
I think it's a -1 to like all rolls effectively, and that's not a huge penalty in the grand scheme of thing. And all you need to do is get remove curse, and it goes away.
I love that. If you throw it away,
it just comes back. Like you can't get
just
rid
in
of it.
your pocket
right?
all the time.
Yeah. So it's kind of a trap, but it's beautiful. And then you find some cool stuff and some treasure and spell books. Like if you're a wizard, you do pretty well in this adventure. There's 2 spell books. But and that's about it. I mean, at the end, if you cleared everybody out, there's a bunch of contraband in there, and you get a ton of money because it's like silk and a bunch of other trade goods that it basically
plus the solid gold items that you find,
plus the treasure items that you find. But what I did like, there's a little detail in there, is the city makes you pay tax on that stuff, right?
Because it's contraband.
It's contraband. And I seem to remember that being more of a thing in past editions, is that like you could adventure in like a city's area, but you'd have to pay like tax on all the treasure you found.
I think it's like a 15 or 20% tax they put on it.
Oh yeah, I mean it's literally thousands of gold pieces worth of treasure, but yeah, I got a kick out of that. So anyways, you clear this all out, and you find that there's a smuggler's ring on there. Ring in there, and you clear it out, and you find the whatchamahoosit, and then that's the end of the first part of the adventure. The second part is, once again, it puts sort of the onus on the DM to get things started.
Yep.
The players are approached. This is supposed to be several days later. They're approached by the city council saying, like, well, this was probably only part of the smuggling ring. We kind of want you to shut down the whole thing. So we want you to sort of lie in wait for when the smugglers come back.
Yeah, and it the writers of the adventure, they say they reward your players if they're able to effectively and intelligently actually participate in this council meeting, trying to deduce how maybe they were smuggling out of there and reward them accordingly. I mean, whatever. If they manage to figure that out, that's great. But at the end of the meeting, they're going to know that there's a boat that's picking up stuff, and the town offers them 2 of their guard to help them out, I think.
So they're taxmen, they're excise officers, they're people that they're tax guys. Like it's very Untouchables, your Elliot Ness going after people not paying their taxes. But yeah, you get 2 NPCs that basically are going to patrol the water looking for when the smugglers come back. And I kind of like the idea here in that your players get to devise a trap.
Sort of, yeah.
I mean, and this really depends on your players. Like, they don't have to.
Yeah.
There's literally not much that they need to do, but if you've got creative players that want to go crazy about this, they can go hog wild, and you should definitely promote and reward that. It's also important to note that the council does offer them monetary compensation for this. So like I think they offer like 500 gold pieces each or something.
Player,
something ridiculous like that.
You do,
which once again, like assuming these are second level players, that's probably too much money. But that's just me.
I can't remember if it's in one of the books that they find in the Smuggler's Den, but it does. You do find out quite plainly when the pickup is, so they know that it's coming at a certain cycle of the moon, which is in a couple weeks from where they're at. So in game, the players have quite a bit of time to devise a plan. They do find the signaling paper. Whether or not they're able to actually decipher how that works, in the adventure, they kind of like, you can't lose. It's like if you signal incorrectly, the boat leaves and comes back the next day, and then continues to come back the next day forever until you figure it out.
I don't think it was that generous, but yeah, you don't need to have the signal to get it out. You also end up with like at least a day's warning or something like that, so you don't need the signaling at all to raid the boat. Board.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I will say this leads us into the next part here. Getting on the boat is probably going to be almost impossible. There's just so many things that could go wrong. I unless your players are pretty well prepared, or you just ignore a lot of what it says in the adventure.
You'd have to, because if they approach from any direction but the direction of the shore, they're not spotted, because they say that everyone's looking towards shore. Sure, fair. There's only one way up onto the boat, and that's through the dropped anchor. I mean, unless you had grappling hooks and did it yourself from the other side of the boat.
Well, I think you could have grappling hooks, which is totally if the players are smart.
Yeah, they say the easiest way to get onto the boat is through the dropped anchor.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's also closed portholes.
Yeah.
Which they could break in through there too.
Yeah. See, like in general, I like the idea of this. But like it says in the adventure that if they're spotted, that these are pirate merchants that will defend their boat viciously and smartly, and that they will rouse everyone on the boat.
Yeah.
So like you can't, like if you're found out without getting in and doing some damage before, I don't really see how feasibly they could win. Like it's a big boat, like it's a 50-foot long boat or something like that.
It's a full-on pirate ship.
It's got to be manned by like 20 plus sailors, you'd think.
I can't remember. There's a bunch of them.
Yeah. But like, how could you win? Like, it just seems like, and there's a level 4 caster on there.
You got to hit hard and fast.
Yeah.
Which might be partly why there's so much magic front loading this, and you have time to prepare. So there is a lot of money that you get due to literally, if you have fighters, all of them should be decked out in like plate mail by the end of the first part of this adventure.
Yeah.
Like there's thousands of gold worth of money.
Yeah.
There's that. And once again, they should know about this. So if you have a magic user, there's nothing stopping them from getting scrolls.
Yeah.
Like you should have silence. You could have any type of random stuff. Like the expectation is, I think the expectation is a lot of the resources they got
Or to be used.
from the first part should be used to prepare for the second part. And if they do that intelligently, they'll have less difficulty.
Yeah.
Alternatively, it could just be kind of nice. You know, like if you're that type of DM, I'm not. I'm a main DM. So I would expect them to be reasonably smart about their approach. But I think even if they're aware, you can bluff your way on. Right? Like
but it also says that as soon as 3 party members are on board, the bluff is immediately discovered.
Yeah.
So however many you're adventuring with, like, I mean, I guess.
Well,
yeah.
it changes the nature of the thing. I mean, basically, once you're on board, it's just going to be a full-on brawl.
Yeah.
And they do a good point about talking about some of the stuff in here, like in that the ship is cramped. So, like, you really, if you get, you know, everybody on deck and you're all fighting on deck where they can hit you 3-1,
You'll lose. Yeah.
Like it's not winnable in that type of situation. If your players are smart and are able to use the environment properly, get into close quarters, you know, block things off, you know, have their fighter or paladin or whoever their beefy guy is holding doorways and people are attacking from the rear, like it's totally doable, but you definitely need to hit hard and hit fast.
Yeah.
So consumables are going to be important, and bringing this up to like 5th edition, there's not going to be any resting in this. There's no short rest going to be possible. There's definitely not going to be a long rest. Like once you're on the ship, you have to clear the ship in one go. So you're going to need consumables.
Yeah, and as running this as a DM, you have to put some kind of timer on the NPCs down below to come up top.
Oh yeah, they
because
should be
like
moving.
you know in whatever 20 seconds another one of the smugglers gets on board from whatever entryway there is to cue your players in that they know you're there and that you got to do something about it.
Yeah.
So fun big boat battle ensues.
Yeah. It's for the lack of, I wouldn't say the lack, but like the second part here is definitely combat heavy, and it will be difficult, and you need to be prepared.
Yep.
But should be successful. So let's just assume you go through and you kill everybody and you actually don't die. I mean, there's some fun stuff in there. Like there's a man in the crow's nest, so you have to go get him out, but he's in the crow's nest, so you're climbing up and he can attack you from, like, there's all kinds of fun little encounters like that. And I will say that the writers did a really good job of trying to provide advice for a lot of contingencies.
Yep.
Right? There's a whole section on what happens if the players try to burn the ship down.
Yeah, and that how much tinder they would need and how much oil they would need. I do like, now that you bring up the preparation, I do like the fact that I think it's best for your players, like, don't put them in a no-win situation, but if they prepare properly, that they can overcome mechanics of the encounter to succeed.
Yeah.
So a normal, like, almost no-win situation on the boat can turn into a win situation if played smartly.
Well, and they also, I mean, there's a good point to point out here too, is that the mechanics of the giant fight, they do give you the out in that the regular sailors will surrender if you take out the 3 leaders.
Yeah.
There's like the lieutenant, the captain, and the wizard.
And if you end up being more players than enemies, they will as well.
Yeah, so there's situations where
There's win
there's
conditions.
win conditions that aren't just kill everybody before you die,
Which is good.
which is excellent. So there are some things that you find on the boat above and beyond just the constant close quarter fighting. So there's a couple of followers that you can get. You can get a pseudo dragon pretty easily, like without really doing anything.
Which is neat. Yeah, you find a bunch of lizard men that are in there, and that's the I guess the big plot twist is that these smugglers are running weapons for lizard men somewhere.
Yeah, it's alluded to.
Yeah,
you know, and it doesn't really explicitly say, but there's definitely clues.
Yeah,
that suggest that they're running weapons. You find the weapons in the hold, and they have a pseudo dragon.
Yeah,
and if you kill them all,
he picks a new friend.
He picks a new friend. So if you have a wizard and you want a familiar,
you got one.
You got one.
Yeah, which is another just a small encounter in the bowels of the boat, because it says that they won't help in the fight.
Yeah. They don't care. They really don't care about the humans at all.
No. Then you find a prisoner.
Yeah, you find an aquatic elf, and I like the preparation notes that they have there. Like depending on what he hears, will depend on whether or not because he's in a hidden compartment.
Yeah.
So like, for example, if he hears someone speaking Elvish, he's gonna like knock on try to get their
and he
attention.
only speaks Elvish.
He only speaks Elvish. So this is kind of interesting. If you don't have anybody who speaks Elvish, which is entirely possible, you can't communicate with him.
Yep.
And like you can let him go and it's fine, and he just goes off. But he
will join you, though.
He will become a permanent
part of your party, because he gets the taste for adventure.
Yes, it's in his blood now. Which is super cool because it's always fun to accumulate followers and whatnot. But I mean, and that's definitely more of an older school type of thing. In the earlier editions, you definitely were all about collecting followers, which were quote unquote your backup characters. Like they're the ones that carried your stuff and guarded your camp, and then when you died they were now upgraded to actual player character. But he can provide a lot of information about some of this stuff and clues to the next adventures. But once again, like, it never explicitly states that the smugglers are smuggling these weapons. There's hints.
There's hints.
There's
player information that they would know as well, that this town is the nearest town to like the lizard folk settlement, so you could deduce that they're trying to plan a raid or something, and it suggests that in the adventure. But yeah, it never says like this is what's going to happen.
I mean, some of it's pretty heavy-handed. Like, I'm pretty sure all the weapons have like lizards on them or something like that. So they were custom made to have lizards on them for the lizard folk. But once again, like, this can just be the end of it. Like, there's no reason that you need to go off and do the next adventure, because going through all this, like, the players end up with all the contraband, all the weapons, so they end up with thousands.
And the boat's worth 5,000 gold in itself, I think.
Well, that's based off of first edition rules. I'm not even sure like what a ship runs for in fifth edition. Anymore. So like and they get the boat.
But this is like, I think this is almost a perfect end to a starting adventure where they have almost any lead that they want to follow up, and then you can find any adventure that you want that suits that. If they're interested in the lizardmen, going to them, you could run reptile god or something, right? Like you could do that.
You could go directly and follow the rest of this tangent.
Yeah, you could sell off all the stuff and do whatever you want and have a bunch of gold. You could keep the boat and go become seafaring pirates.
I think
if you have a crew too, because you're probably going to have a crew.
I would definitely say that if you were hoping to do some sort of maritime based adventure campaign, this is a great way to kick it off, because it's an organic acquisition of a boat. Like they earn it, if you will, right? And it's given to them, and they have allies in town and all of this stuff. So it's pretty fun. But sort of in some of the conclusion stuff in here, I must admit that in the adventure, I kind of liked all the appendices at the end. I fully admit that this is definitely a me thing, and I'm just sort of nerding out on it. But every single pirate has its own treasure loadout. Everyone. So depending on what pirates you got or you defeated, they have different treasure on them,
which is great.
Which is ridiculous. Like, I fully admit that. But
that's detail that's no longer like lost in fifth edition.
Well, that's the level of detail that you yourself, like, I mean, if you do this, I tip my hat. Because if you go through and every single monster you have, you create a custom
unique
treasure for them, that's amazing. And that's what the authors did. So like, that's the type of like little detail that I really enjoy from getting from an adventure. It's something I think is super neat that
makes your world really rich,
and I would never do it myself. So like, that's the type of value added stuff that I love from a really well thought out and prepared adventure.
And for $2 you can get that.
And for
That's
$2,
a lot of preparation for $2. Yeah.
Well, I mean, obviously when they first made this, 30
years ago,
30 plus years ago, going on 40 years ago, obviously it costs more than that. But for right now, I mean, I'm sure we'll do a bunch of older adventures, because a lot of them are fantastic.
They're great, yeah.
And in terms of like accessibility, they're super cheap.
Yep.
Right, like you're not spending $100 or $50 even.
They're cheap enough, like we talked about earlier, that you can pickpocket towns from one and take an adventure from another, and create this custom, not custom adventure for cheap. And the level of detail that these guys put into these adventures back then was immense.
It's insane. It's a completely different beast. Like there's been such an evolution in D&D since then that it's really apples and oranges at this point. But you can totally use it, and if nothing else, it's a great way of cherry picking plot points. And,
it's great.
that type of stuff. Anywho, I think that's pretty much all I had to say.
Yeah, I have nothing else to say about this adventure.
Yeah, so let us know what you thought. Are we crazy? Do you agree with this? Did you ever run this back in the day, or have you run it? I mean, it's a pretty fun adventure, so hit us up on the Twitters or fire us an email. The contact information's in the usual spots. Also, if you have any suggestions on adventures you'd like us to pick apart, let us know.
Complain about,
dissect, have a good time discussing. Anywho, thanks a lot for listening, and I hope to catch you next time.
See you later, guys.